Chapter 5.
Ian Mogonia,
My man. His Scots tongue flowed like honey from his wife's lips. He placed a finger to her mouth. Shh, my love. At 31, Paige was scant older than he'd been on the day he'd met her, but her hair had yet to show a hint of gray. She still looked like a maiden. The only lines she wore on her face were the laugh lines about those lovely lips, sweet, bonny lips that had pleasured him so very well throughout their years.
Ian,
She complained as he drew her into the stable.
we have guests, my love.
Still, her lips curved a bit mischievously, and she reached down to plant her soft hand against the back of his. But instead of slapping him away, she merely caressed him, her eyes hooding with desire. "I've a craving for plums," he teased.
Morun jealous,
She said, "My faithful love." And her answering smile made Ian's heart trip a beat.
you'll find no plums beneath my skirt,
She chastised. He pulled his wife close, his cock hardening beneath his plaid. "I disagree, for that is where I will find the most delicious plum of all." She didn't fight him, so he drew her against him, whispering softly, "I have dreamt endlessly of that plum, the delightful taste, the tantalizing scent. I long to sink my teeth into that tender flesh and lift my tongue along the cleft." Paige shivered in his arms, and he knew by the way she melted against his embrace that his fingers would find her ready and wet. And yet, even as he rediscovered the treasure he sought, the silky feel of her body sent a violent shudder through him. He was no longer a boy, she no longer a girl, but she was as beautiful as she was the day he first saw her, dressed in not more than a flimsy chemise, her hair sopping wet. He loved her more fiercely now than he ever did before. Paige, his heart, his only love, had given him years of loyalty and love, a daughter with a smile as beauteous as her own. She treated Malcolm as though he were her very own, and his clan with every bit of affection as Ian did himself. They could not have been any more blessed in his choice of bride. In truth, Ian would give Paige anything in his power, anything at all, but alas, there was only one thing she ever asked for of late, and that he could not provide: a reunion with her father. "No one will miss us," he coaxed. "Constance and Caelan have everyone's attention as it should be." His shaft nestled happily against the crook of his wife's thighs, lifting of its own accord to her most delicate place. "On the other hand, you have my undivided attention." He sent a hand to her bottom, pressing his arousal fully against her so as to make his point. Her eyes widened, and so did his grin. Paige laughed.
you are insatiable,
She complained, although she lifted herself on tiptoes to kiss his mouth, automatically sliding her arms about his waist. As she had done only seconds before, Ian melted against his wife, as subject to her wiles as she was to his. But then, suddenly, she put a hand to his chest, pushing him gently away.
Alas, but we cannot, Ian. There are too many people. How can we?
Ian wiggled his brows. "Quite easily," he argued. She gave him a lovely, chastening glance beneath hooded lids. Her cheeks bloomed with higher color, but she nevertheless shook her head. Ian felt like a young lad who'd been shown a sweet tart and then had it ripped out of his hand. He pouted like a boy. "How about the tip, to whet my appetite for later?" Her shoulders shook gently, but this time with quiet laughter.
Only the tip?
Ian nodded quickly, excited by the prospect. "Only the tip," he promised, "and then I will be a very good boy and tend to all my guests."
All of them? Even the wet nurse who came with Brock and Elizabeth? The one who seems to be all eyes for the very handsome MacKinnon laird?
Nay, well, not her. Paige smiled sweetly. Reaching down between them, she lifted her skirt, allowing him access.
Only the tip, and no more, Ian.
Ian nearly laughed, because she sounded like a mother rationing cookies to her son. But laughter was forgotten, and his heart nearly leapt from his chest as he pushed his plaid out of the way, taking himself into his hands. They had not made love for days, and it was driving him mad. He could scarcely contain himself as his flesh touched her silky warmth, and he shuddered savagely as her body welcomed him inside.
Only the tip,
she whispered against his ear, her breath hot and sweet. It gave Ian yet another shiver. Aye, he agreed with a guttural moan. But how many times? Her lovely brow furrowed.
How many times?
It took her a full moment before she realized what he was asking. She was silent so long that Ian made to withdraw, though she pulled him back, arching slightly, laughing softly.
5,
she said. Relieved, Ian fell back against her, closing his eyes, savoring the feel of her soft skin melting around his cock. Intending to make the most of it and savor every second, he withdrew the first time with a little shiver and then pushed himself back inside. Only the tip. 1, he said, and withdrew again.
That was 2,
Paige said firmly, although her breath now sounded labored to his ears. Ian groaned with pleasure, with careful control, still savoring the moment, the way her body stretched and closed about him. He withdrew once more, and Paige said,
2.
Ian tried not to laugh.
3,
she whispered. 4, he said. 5. The tension in Ian's shoulders was palpable. He froze, dreading the moment of separation. If she just let him do it a few more times, he would gift her with the seed of his love, and mayhap give her another child, mayhap a son. The stable went completely silent. It was dark now, the air musty with the scent of sex.
6,
his wife said quietly, and Ian remained very still, not wanting her to claim he'd gone against his word.
6,
she said again, and moved provocatively against him, tilting her hips so as to give him better access. Ian pretended to resist. But you said... Her hand moved behind his arse, pulling him back.
Dinna mind what I said. Now I want 6,
she demanded. Ian laughed. And now who's the insatiable one? But he gave her what she asked for, pushing himself inside once more, this time much more than just the tip. He waited to see if it pleased her, and when she buried her lips against his neck and nipped his skin, lifting one leg about his waist, he knew he had. Paige sighed contentedly.
You can have 10,
she offered, pulling him down toward the ground. Ian followed her down, covering her body with his own. He moved against her, worshipping her body, withdrawing and pushing back inside with a rousing slowness, wanting to pleasure her first. Each time she took him more fully, widening her legs a bit more, nibbling his neck a little harder. Paige, he whispered. Guillaume Mochria. You are the music of my heart.
And you mine,
Paige said, feeling every bit the wanton. Her senses heightened. Her husband was a master puppeteer, knowing her only too well. They had a house full of guests, a wedding to see to, and that was only if you somehow managed to forget that they had a village to rebuild. With so much work to be done, this was not where she should be right now, though she must confess, in that instant, there was nowhere else she'd rather be. Ian loved her sweetly, filling her wholly, caressing her body from the inside out. Here, alone in the stables, she felt like a new bride lying beneath him, arching for his loving, letting him fill her as deeply as he pleased. It was easy to see how young folk could get carried away, and Paige was so pleased for Constance. This was the reason for life. She cared not one whit that the ground was cold, or that the smell of pigs and horseflesh surrounded them. At times like this, she was again that lost little girl who had loved her reluctant champion so madly. But she detected other scents that were hardly suitable to a stable. Cinnamon and ginger, lavender, cloves. Paige froze.
"Ian!"
Her husband stopped loving her at once, responding to the tone of her voice.
"Did you order supplies to be stored in the stables instead of the storehouse?"
"Nay."
"It's dark," she said. "Light a lamp."
"Right now?" His voice sounded incredulous, but Paige had a sudden and unshakable sense of peril. Before either of them could entirely regain their senses, she heard the crack of metal against bone and felt Ian crumble against her.